a little background on how I sort of developed my way of doing it. Everybody has their own style. Some people start with the medium tones and they work lighter and add the darker. Some people start light and work to dark. I guess I start dark and go light, and it probably goes back to my college days. I was an art student, art major, and in grad school I was a painting major. And the way I learned to, just the way I developed doing paintings was to put my areas of color down first, kind of dark, and then I just started building up. I'd go to the medium tones and then put my little highlights in. And if I didn't like the way it looked, I would glaze over it, tone it down, and build it up again. And basically that's sort of the way I just applied that to these. So if you want a real short note, start dark, work to your lights, change the color, put a little transparent, add a little pastel, and you're done. That's all there is to it. Yeah.
That was real simple.
Makes it sound so easy, doesn't he?
That's what I do. All right. A little thing that I like to do, especially with figures, obviously the more exposed flesh, the more colors I use. If it's just a little superhero and the head showing and the hands, I don't get involved with all the multiple layers, because sometimes I do as many as 12 different layer applications of color on a figure if it's predominantly skin tones. Okay.
Oh, there we go. So Jim, how do you paint?
How do I paint? Yeah, let's get to it.
Let's talk about stage. Let's
get the good stuff. Here.
Hold on, I'm not getting paint. I understand how you feel, because I had my first girl kit set on a shelf for about 4 years until I felt comfortable doing it. Just dive in. I mean, the worst thing is you strip it and you start over again. All right. One thing I like to do with the paints is I paint the caps, because I keep them in the drawer and I look at the caps, because when I decide, I look at the colors. I don't pull a flesh color as such. I have this little card. These are opaques that I tend to use for figures, and then these are the transparents that I tend to use. Okay. So I prime them in the dark, in the rust color. I used to use the gray, and then I ended up painting them dark, and I thought, well, that's kind of dumb. I just sort of start. I start with the muscle areas, the muscle masses. Now this is just a leather tan at this point. All I'm doing is giving him an overall color.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, I think it's kind of boring.
It looks like you're swirling around.
I always keep it moving. If I pause for a second, I get too much there. What I'm doing, I'm trying to just gradually lighten things up. Okay, now this is just regular leather tan. And I'm sort of making the primer is just that. It's a primer. It's not really my color. But I like to have everything covered with it, because the idea behind why I go from the dark to light, to me, is that the darkest parts are the recessed parts. They're the hard to get parts. They're the parts that are inside and underneath. Okay? I don't want to start light and have all my flesh tones and colors, and then I have to try and get in under there to the dark part. So to me, it's easier to get that done and out of the way, and then just work my way out.
What pressure do you use for Jesse?
Pardon me?
What pressure do you use for Jesse?
Usually on mine, I'm working like 25. Sometimes I go higher, but 25 is a start. 20. Now I'm not gonna finish this whole thing. I'm just gonna.
What?
I want people to see.
You made me prime over this, and then it's not going to get finished today? Oh, hell no.
Okay, so I want people to be able to see the difference in the different steps. And I'll admit, I use a lot of paint. Okay, I'm sure there's quicker ways, and there's other ways you can get just as nice results. And I'm not saying by any means this is the best way to do it. It's just for me, this works. I'm trying to get where I can see it.
Primer again?
That is just regular duplicolor red primer. Any brick primer I hear all kinds of things about all kinds of questions about primers or whatever. I sell my own primer, and it's acrylic, but primer's primer. Its job is to adhere to paint. That's it.
Now, even though I'll still do a little of this to the underside. It's not a lot. It helps unify the color. You know, it makes the primer match a little better with what I'm building there. Sorry. I'm going to leave this down here, the primer. Sorry. the educational thing here. So I'm going to leave this untouched. Okay, maybe I'll put a little more here. I'll take it with me and paint it for you.
Oh no! I want to do it now.
So this is actually just leather tan, and it depends. It really depends upon the figure, what kind of colors I'm eventually going to end up with, what I go with. Now, you know, the flesh tones are like, they're the pot, and I add a little variations to it, add a little to tint it and to change it and to alter it. It's the core color, you know, and then you build on that. All right. Just swirling round and round. You can all do this.
It was amazing. I mean, we were in the class yesterday, and you look at this, and it's really intimidating. I'm the same way, but we had a dozen people in our class, in our Paint Fest class on Friday, and everybody got the hang of it like that. It's like knowing the magician, you know, it's like knowing the trick before. It's like you see this, and it's scary, but once you know the steps of how to do it, it really is not as intimidating as you might think.
The semi-transparency. The idea behind this is I like to very, very gradually, so you can barely notice it, start to build up the color. Okay, so the regular opaques, somebody told me if you cut them with Future, you can make them a little thinner. And that was the advantage of that. So I used to cut them about 50-50 with Future and start to build it up. With a transparent, if you keep working an area, it's still going to stay transparent. Eventually the area will flood. You'll get the color collecting in the recesses, but it's still going to be pretty much a transparent color. The advantage to adding the Future to it, and now this semi-transparent, is that it starts thin and light, but as you work it, you can build it up eventually to an opaque, which you can't do with the transparent. Okay? Now, since it's semi-transparent, the stuff that's underneath shows through. Okay? The color that's underneath enhances the color that you're putting on top. One of the things I try not to do is completely cover what you've done. Let some of that color show through. Okay? So I'm going to just, let's move up a little step here. So I just started with the little leather tan. Let's go a little bronze flesh. And I seldom use these straight. Okay? I use a little bronze flesh and maybe a little, I might even put a little spice tan in just to see. Okay? So this is a little bronze flesh.
And that's a semi-transparent.
This is semi-transparent now. I'm going to start playing with this.
Gargoyle 6.
No, I'm just looking. I'm trying to make up my mind what I want to play with here. I just want something a little bit lighter. I'm just going to put a couple drops of the medium African. I try not to do the same formula every single time. One of the fears I had, I thought if I looked at my stuff on the shelf and they all had exactly the same, GK skin tone, and it's like I said, it's a good paint, but everybody's different. Sitting here looking around, you can see all different tones. Okay.
So which color did you end up with?
I ended up using a little bronze flesh here, and I put in a couple drops of the medium African flesh. I just want something a little bit lighter. And I try to pick an area where the muscles are bulging. Typically, I'll start on the shoulder. It's a safe place to check my color. And so
you do the same thing I do. You always spray it on your hand before you
yeah.
I walk out of a shop after about 6 hours. My whole arm is like 20 different colors.
So what I'm doing now is I'm just starting to put a little lighter shade. I'm going to leave the recessed areas, the darker color. Really light. If I suddenly see the color, I mean, if the color is, oops, I did it too heavy. Okay. And it also depends upon what type of figure. For the monsters or for vampires and stuff, yes, you can do modeling. I mean, I've done that too. I've been more deliberate and gotten closer so you can see the lines. With girl kits, we have this fantasy image of them, and they're more pure and even and solid. And so I try to keep it very even. But if I'm doing something more rugged, I'll get in closer so you can see the variations. I did one, the Blood Allure, over at the Zox table, where I was a little more deliberate in getting in closer, and the flesh tones are a little more uneven. Oops, yeah, I got that a little heavy at first. The good thing too is when they first go on, you see them, and then as they dry, they tend to lighten up a bit. So sometimes I thought I put it on too heavy, and it wasn't. I was able to go back.
Well, acrylics tend to dry dark.
You know, sometimes it depends upon the color.
I found that the colder colors tend to dry darker, the warmer colors tend to dry lighter. That's been my experience.
Another thing to keep in mind is the way light works. Okay, your light source, the sun, most light source is coming from above. Advantage that I feel by putting the darker colors down first, they're underneath and recessed. Well, as I paint, I work more straight in or angling down slightly. So the paint is just hitting, the lighter color is hitting where the light would hit. So it's sort of replicating the way light works. See, aren't you all just sitting there thinking, I do that? Well, I think the key is to go slow and subtle and light. I mean, you can't use a heavy finger on it. You just want to put a mist, just very light application, very delicate. Okay. A little more in his face here. I think what they need is a light behind.
Yeah.
So, actually what I'm doing here, I really haven't started highlighting. I've started to, the low parts, the underneath parts are still a little bit darker. I don't know, do they show? I don't know if it shows or not. Alright, let me kick it up a step here. So, that was bronze flash and a little African. Maybe I'm going to go some GK and a little bit of bronze. I tend to use a little bit of the previous one to help the transition, so it's a little more gradual transition. It's not abruptly from this to that. So take a little, where is it? GK. There's GK.
Now, if you actually still got some in the
There's a little
airbrush, you
bit
could
in
just
there.
add a little bit extra and just keep going with that.
You could. There's probably more in there than I should have.
Yeah, that's why I take that little prong off.
I had a little too much. Okay, so now this is the GK flesh, and I put it's mostly GK, and I put a little dab of just a little bit of the bronze, since the bronze was the previous layer. And again, I'm just hitting the parts of the sculpt that protrude the most. On a face, like I said, typically I'll hold it horizontal and shoot down and across again, so that I'm just picking up the parts that stick out the furthest, and I'm getting my highlight colors on there. I still don't consider what I'm doing at this point highlighting. I'm just adding a little more definition or making it a little more rounded. Now, each color, think of it. This is where I'll put this.
Creating depth, maybe.
That's a little bit balanced. Let me set this down here for a minute. Think of the colors you use, kind of like a pyramid. The base color, that's the base of the pyramid. It's everywhere. That's where I tend to use a lot of things. But then as you go, each color gets a little lighter, a little lighter. You're using less and less and less and less and less and less. And you know, at the end, I'm just putting little bits here and there. And again, I'm trying not to completely cover or eradicate anything I've done previously.
Looks beautiful.
I don't know how well. So this arm here, this is plain primer. There's a little leather tan on this, and then all right. I'm gonna go a little. I'm gonna add a little GK flush and get a little lighter. So again, it's a lot of layers. It's a slow build up.
This is what you got to do to get results like that.
People say, "How do you do it?" This is how I do it. Okay, there's other ways that work just as efficiently and as well for other people, but for me,
Well, you got 40 minutes.
I got 40 minutes yet.
Yeah.
Good. I need it.
Bam.
Your audience
Do a little
is
soft
rapt.
shoe.
Rapt.
Do you seal very often? Or
It depends. Like at this point, no. So now I'm going to go with just the plain GK flesh, and I mean, there's not a whole lot of difference from what I just used on the last round, but
This is actually why I wanted to learn this, so that I wouldn't have to use, or would use pastels as absolutely minimum as possible. So I was like,
So
okay,
now
let's do this seminar.
I'm just repeating what I did. But I'm using a little less paint. I'm not covering as much of the area. I'm not going into the recessed parts. Every once in a while, I'll do a little underneath shot to like I said, to carry that color through. I mean, shoot a little more across the face here. Now, I sort of work in stages. Part one is establishing the values, sort of getting just the basic values, lights, darks, that whatnot. Then I like to shift the color, enhance the color, throw some other colors in there. That's when I start using transparents, and I'll do that in just a minute here. I'm skipping his hand here. Whoops. What is that? Now I may end up, obviously I cover an awful lot of what's put down in the beginning. Sort of neglected over there. I don't have a set formula of colors or what to do next.
Just go with the flow.
And that's why I sort of like having the caps painted, because I can see the color and say, all right, I'm going to use that one. Use that next. I can never remember. And this helps too. See these cards? I took the colors that I typically use and just held the card sideways, and I put a couple drops and let it run down. And then so it's sort of a quick chart. They're all close together, and I can see. And one of the other things I like to do is to use reference pictures. I mentioned this to people yesterday. I have this book that if I'm doing something specific, I'll try to find something. Let me just skip to the back here to this Victoria piece. Okay, so this is the painting, but I was supposed to do a natural. I tried to find a model or a picture or something that I can use as a guide for colors. And then, see, I can take this and put this alongside and decide which ones I can use, which colors would pull out. Yeah, over here on this gal. So it helps me a little bit in some deciding, like when I want to add colors to enhance, change. But sometimes it's a model, sometimes it's an actress. But if you can find some pictures just for color reference, and I use them as a guide for that one. So let me get a little bit lighter here. Pale flesh or virgin flesh? I'll use pale. Virgin lighter. Yeah, I'll go pale. It's not a gal, so I'm going to stick with the pale here.
Now, do you use different? You just said from a gal to a guy. Do you use different skin tones from a male to a female?
Yeah, I might start with more browns. The other thing is you can adjust it with transparencies. Again, at this stage, I'm still just trying to get the shading, the modeling, the light to dark the way I want, where the muscle tone shows. That's one of the things I try to tell the guys in the class. Don't cover the whole thing. There we go. Now we're going to get some things. Now I put too much there. See, I do this in the privacy of my basement. Nobody knows how I fumble around.
Did you see the finished product?
When I do a search, I do a search for the largest images I can find, and then I'll print them out. And glossy paper obviously will give me better detail. So now I'm using even less. This is an even lighter color, and probably even less in there. Pale flesh.
That's pale flesh.
Now, at this point, this is about what I usually do. The little tendons in the neck, if you turn it away from you and shoot across there, you can pick them up.
Across or along?
I go across this way, so I'm just catching the part that sticks out the most. All right.
Let's take it shape.
Okay. Again, I'm going to leave this unfinished, and I'll just do more and more as I work my way across there. Okay. Now, at this point, I might say, okay, I'm happy with the shading of it. Now I have to decide if I'm happy with the overall color, the tone of it. Do I want to add more orange to it, or yellow, or brown, or
Green?
green? It depends. Again, it depends upon the figure. Let me just do a little sweep of. Sometimes when I look at them, they look too orange. Okay, I want to get rid of the orangey, so I might sweep a little yellow over top or a little brown. And since I do it different, it depends. Sometimes I'm a little heavier with the highlight. I got to tone it down.
Now, if you go too light, what do you use?
Oh well, I
use
use
something
more of a darker transparent, maybe tone the whole thing down. Sure, I got that there.
But a transparent brown instead of a flash, or okay, gotcha.
But like I said, I have this little card with all these different. These are the ones I tend to use on flesh. Okay, there's others, but on here I have amber oxide, yellow ochre, gold toner, vivid orange, natural flesh, bright flesh, Mars red, sepia, red violet, chestnut, burnt sienna, and rich brown. I tend to use those more often. There's other things I have used. I've gone in with transparent dusty paint sometimes. Again, I look at what I have paint wise. I look at my reference. What's the difference, and what do I need to shoot in there to get it closer to that? Yep. Little yellow ochre. I didn't put it everywhere. It's really subtle. I did it like on the undersides of the muscles, down under his arm, under his neck. I don't do it everywhere. What I'm trying to do is throw in more colors. The more colors you can put in, I feel the richer it gets, the more it enhances it. But the trick is you want to put them in so that they enhance, but you don't want people to notice it. So that you don't see, oh, there's yellow, or oh, there's blue. And that's why sometimes I think people have no idea how many layers and colors are in there, because it's a balance trying to get the two. I'm putting chestnut on. I random, more in the under the arms, and I'll still take it a little lightly over top of everything.
So blend them all together.
Sort of ties them all together, and again, it's another layer of color in there.
So it's still transparent paint, correct?
The chestnut isn't. I don't know.
The chestnut is more of like a saddle brown, like a
but
light saddle
it
brown.
works. It's transparent. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's officially called a transparent, but to me, it works like a transparent. Chestnut sepia is the same way. When you first pick up the bottle and you haven't used it in a while and you turn everything, you don't see the pigment gathered at the bottom. You know how when they sat for a long time, you get that buildup. With the sepia and the chestnut, that doesn't seem to be there. So to me, it's more of a transparent color. This is burnt transparent burnt sienna.
Ah, that's a good one.
Wait a minute. Not the yellow over there.
It's right in front of you.
There. Oh, it's right in front. See, that's another reason I like to paint the caps. I have these caps sitting all around. I haven't been putting them back on. When they're painted, it's a whole lot easier. So, the first step in the process is establishing your values, light, medium, and darks, getting all the areas the way you want them. The second part that I do is this enhancement with transparency. Okay, shooting some underneath, on the side. Again, you see, I used 3 or 4 different ones here right now. And
Would that also be called tinting, Jim?
In effect, you're tinting it. I think of a tint more as when you mix it with the paint. Like if I have red and I add a little red, a little yellow to it, I've tinted the red. This is more of a transparent overlay. It's a misting so that the color that's underneath is showing through. And the color that you see on the paper, oh, isn't that lovely? It doesn't look like that on here because that is just changing what I have slightly. So I'm shifting the tone. I'm shifting the overall color of it. Okay? So,
some Andrew Wyatt paintings. There's a lot of different colors.
well, layers. Now, at a certain point, when I'm well, hold on. Let me just get this put it out. So I get the values set, and then I do some adjusting, and sometimes I have to go back in with my highlight color. Sometimes when you do this, all these different layers, these transparent layers, it will tend to knock the contrast between your lights and darks, it'll tend to knock that down. And it's not as obvious, and so you might have to pull that out again. And so I would just take a little bit of whatever the lightest one I used. I think it was the
Pale flesh.
Pale flesh, okay. And I'm just going to take a couple drops of that. Just let me see. And again, this is the semi-transparent. So what will happen is I'm just going to add what's there is going to show through. And I'm trying to do it very subtle. So that I just start to see a little bit of the highlight. And I have no doubt that where you're sitting, you can't see a thing.
Sitting right next to you, I can't see you with your hands in the way.
I don't know where to put this so you can see it. But here's the bra, and then moving over, and then moving over, and then around. So, okay, now I'm still not finished.
I don't know yet.
Then I'll do, once I get to the point that I'm sort of satisfied with the overall flesh tones and the little transparency that I've added to it, then I go in and do some work with some pastels to sort of punch in some more color here and there.
And do you seal before the pastels, or do you just go over? Just go into it.
You could, it wouldn't hurt. I mean, I don't so much anymore. Sometimes I feel like the sealed pastels don't stick as well.
Remove some of the tooth.
Yeah. So once you seal it, so let me just shift this stuff back a little. Okay.
So how many layers have we done so far?
I think I counted
started
8
with-
or 9.
Yeah, we started with the base, and then I did some leather tan, and then I did bronze and GK, and then I think I used some. I lost track.
Yeah, I purposely counted. I think it was between 8 or 9. I lost count.
So there's
But
8
he
or
mixed a
9.
couple of them.
Now, if I wanted to show like beard on him and make his arms, like imply the hair, I might use Payne's Gray and do a little light Payne's Gray there, a little light Payne's Gray down here, maybe a little light on his chest. On the female figures, I'll go in with the transparent red violet. I tend to use the red violet or There's a reddish one that I like.
Red oxide?
No, I haven't used that one. I do use the red violet just a little bit. Add a little blush to the top of the chest, on the sides of the breast, the knuckle. I tend to do on the hands. If you look at some pictures of hands, the different extremities, it's not the same color everywhere. On a full figure, I try to make it a point to have maybe the arms and the hands and the feet a little different from the mid part of the torso. But if you can get some good reference pictures, you'll see those differences in there. Okay. Well, then once I'm satisfied with this, then we'll get some pastels out. And there we go. A brush. Since I didn't spray him any, I'm just going to get a little brown here. Maybe on his forearm. Again, it's subtle. It's very light. Maybe under here. Now you can either, I like to use this and very lightly give a little. If I get it too heavy, you can give it a good shot and most of it comes off. Another thing, the little end of this, I took a knife and shaved it down a little bit, and when I have to clean the nozzle on the airbrush, it fits right in there, and you can give it a good shot of air. It goes right over there. So it fits right in. It's great. Oh, let's add some other colors.
That's another neat tip.
I'm going to add a little purple. Why? I like purple. A little purple in
And
the
making a
recess
magenta
area.
just for him.
Yeah. Here's a little blue. A little blue in the recess there. Usually on figures, I have kind of a couple rust or orangey, dark orange, burnt orange kind of color that works good too. It just adds a little more definition to the muscle. So
Like a terracotta.
I'll go in there. Let's see. Sometimes I just can't find the pastel, the color that I want. You can mix them on here. Like I'll blend a little blue in with the red. But it's not taking as well. That should be darker. But pastels.
Okay.
Plain rust, and then some of the other colors, and then there's more colors, and then over here I did more pastel work. And probably at home I'd probably do a little more. I might put some more transparent on his arm to make a little more red down at the bottom.
Do you seal at this point?
Oh, definitely, yes. Once you put some pastels on, yes, I would seal it.
What would you use?
The steps I call are always the same. It's just it's different for every kit because of the coloring you want and the effect you want. But the dark to the light, get the values worked in. Shift the color with some transparencies. Don't do it everywhere. Put a little bit on the arms, a little bit under, different areas.
That's something I didn't ever.
Because if you do it the same everywhere, it's going to look the same everywhere. Person's telling this isn't finished. I'd be putting a lot more colors on here. But it's the same technique, the same idea, delicate light.
Real fast, besides your red primer, is everything you use semi-transparent after that?
On the flesh tones, the leather tan wasn't.
Okay.
Okay, that was, it's putting like a base color over the primer. But once I get into showing different values, different gradations, I like the semi-transparent because it goes on thin. And if you get a little heavy-handed, it's a little more forgiving than the regular opaque. You can pull back and not damage it yet.